Well, thanks everyone. I realize this is the morning session and everyone's got lots of different things that they could be going to. So I appreciate you coming along and joining the session. Really excited to go through this with you, get some of your ideas and validate what works and what doesn't. We'll get started. Actually, I'm going to ask you to read the actual slides here. And when you talk about people, it's something that we want to have happen across. It'll be open for participation for all people in Canada. But we're also thinking that in particular, it's going to be helpful for post-secondary students, where, and specifically to that, it's not just a typical comp sci or engineering students that you get that participate in this. The idea is to make it a little bit more broader, bring in people from the social sciences as well. Then people who are in the middle of a career transition, getting started with data. Open data would be a good way to do that, as well as professionals looking to make a social impact. So where we are is there's a few of us who have gotten together to brainstorm and put together a draft concept of what this might look like. And what we're hoping to do today is to get your opinions, your feedback on what works or what doesn't. So our workshop today, we'll go through the concept, do a bit of a quick Q&A. Then we'll go through some brainstorming and do some voting at the end. So it's going to be mostly talking through some initial stuff, but getting your feedback is probably the most critical part. So with the concept itself, brief history. So there was a national hackathon for open data that's called CODE that the government of Canada did quite a long time ago. In February 2014 was the first iteration. And I was out of country, so I couldn't participate. I remember that well. And then the next year I wanted to, and I actually didn't manage to either because I had a major project come up and I couldn't spend the time to join the hackathon. I enjoyed them and I wanted to participate. I thought it was a great idea. And so I started to put a calendar entry into my calendar to say every year in February, remind me, to sign up for this so I don't miss it. But of course, it didn't actually happen. And part of the reason why it did happen is the typical reasons for why hackathon often are one-offs or maybe two-offs, right? And that's because the traditional KPIs for success, the measurements for success, tend to be around these sort of metrics, which are larger and easier to parse at the top, but towards the bottom, it's hard to assess the impact to residents. And with government hackathons, it makes sense that you have to justify the ROI. And of course, when you do so, it's most important to look at those, look at the impact to residents as a key or the key metric for success, even though it's hard to measure. The other thing too is these hackathons aren't the sort of places where novel society changing sort of applications come out. They're not meant for that. And you don't see them happen. So inevitably hackathons, whether governments or not, get disappointed. Whereas with Codex, which actually I should have mentioned my bad here. This Learn-a-thon Hackathon we're calling Codex, which is as the Canadian Open Data Experience. With Codex itself, we're focusing then on the number of participants as the most important one. The others are bonuses. It's nice if we get them, but that's not really the key point. The reason why that's the case is that Codex, the goals of Codex are to provide data enthusiasts, thinkers, and doers to work with open data sets, gain new skills, and advance towards future success. And it's with these goals in mind that when you actually look at the number of attendees, they're a leading metric for future impact. And so it's fine that we focus in on just the participation itself as the key driver and use that as a barometer. Here's an example. We have someone who's going through a career transition, and looking to hearing about a hackathon for data, right? And at that point, the person, they might not feel comfortable because they realize they don't have the skills. Typically, when you think about hackathons, it's something that requires you to have some technical capability to join. Whereas the idea with Codex, because learning is a key part of this, someone can join, learn, and then ideally just be able to create something that might be relevant just mostly to themselves. They might create some insight, put it in a resume, and then use that as something to talk about down the line. And that's perfectly fine in the context of a Learn-a-thon and a hackathon, because that's the goals, right? You're kind of checking those things off. And that's what we're hoping to have with Codex itself. There is a parallel example that you could have also with post-secondary students, where in that scenario, they would go to a hackathon, be able to participate and do something or build something. But from a purely measurement point of view, you might not see much come out of it. If you come from it from this Codex perspective, they built something. Again, it might only be relevant mostly to themselves. They put it on the resume. It makes them stand out a little bit different. They can talk through it on their own interviews. And then once they get to that point, they go through their career. They'll remember that at some point in time before, they've worked with data, in particular open data. And then ideally, they would go full circle and then engage and help do things with the community itself. And I feel strongly about this because I came through that similar path, and I know a number of people that I know have gone through that path as well. And so it's not something you can easily measure the impact of something like this over someone's 10 or 15-year career, but it's there, and I think this is a way to get that way, get more of this sort of scenarios to happen. So talk a bit about the difference in terms of KPIs. The technical experience that you might experience in Codex would be a little bit different. The student types would be a little bit more inclusive as well. It would include social science students who will ultimately want or need to be able to work with data. And the outputs don't have to always be applications. If it's going to be a report or a presentation or a visualization, that's great. That's still something that they use the data to create some sort of output for. They use some new skills to be able to get there. So the current concept at a high level is that it's going to be focused quite a bit on the Learn-a-thon part. It might be a day or two before the actual hackathon itself, where we allow people to say, here are the sessions that you want to go through, and here's what you could potentially learn. And then at a high level timeline, the idea is that we'd have not this upcoming February, but the next one in February, and have the Learn-a-thon and hackathon around that time period, because that's a week before reading week. There are not as many exams or stressors at that point. You can get people to come in, and still the opportunity for students to participate in that sense. There's a more detailed timeline that we put together, but figure it wouldn't make sense to kind of share this for today, because we'd have to go through in more detail and spend a bunch of time on it. But if you're at all interested, happy to share it and kind of talk through the justifications as to why it's set up that way. Another thing about the current concept, the awards themselves, instead of having a simple kind of top 5 prize for the participants, trying to model what I've seen from engineering as well as visualization competitions, where there's a plethora of awards at different categories and different skill sets, so that people who don't necessarily have the skill or the technical capability to begin with can still participate and can still produce inputs that people will look at and then maybe provide them some votes for a prize. And finally, we've started a list of people and organizations that would be of interest, that might actually be good people to join this sort of thing for. But we also don't happen to know everyone and all the organizations, so getting your input would be helpful. So I'm gonna stop here right now for a quick Q&A, probably 5-10 minutes, maybe even less, and then we can jump into brainstorming. But does anyone have any questions about this? Or like this is the first time you guys are hearing of this, so feel free to ask me any questions.
Your early February date, does that align with Open Data Day?
That's a good question. Isn't Open Data Day?
It's like the first weekend, first Saturday of February.
I thought it was March, but no, that's probably a good point. That's a really good point.
It might be March. That's a good question.
No, it's a good point. That's great. That's a good idea. I should jot this down.
So, I know some things that are going on in Manitoba through the IT industry, but they're really focused on high school.
Oh, yeah?
Is that not consideration? Because when you're talking about skills and, you're talking about some interested kids, skilled kids.
Yeah.
That could be another opportunity because it's all about getting them thinking about careers in tech and IT or ag tech. I know some folks in Regina who are really keen.
Right. And actually, let me take this point as a jumping point off. I meant to mention this as well, but we have Wilfrida and Chen here who are part of some of these conversations we're having, so they can answer it. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is because I know Wilfrida's talked about this before. I think the current idea is that it's a good idea, but we want to just focus on a few groups first and make sure we reach them. But at the same time, I mean, if there's enough interest for that as kind of an outcome, maybe that's what we pivot to, right? There's no, we got to do exactly this. It's just more what's most effective, and the high school's perspective makes a lot of sense as well.
Thanks.
Okay.
I have a follow-up question.
Please.
Which high school did you say in Regina?
Oh, I was just talking to a senior executive from FCC who is very involved in reaching into the Regina high school community, but particularly First Nations kids, because that's his sort of opportunity for First Nations engagement, but also from an urban First Nations perspective.
Yeah.
And the angle they have is the incredible labor shortage in ag, period, and they're just thinking about a more alternative, different ways of recruiting people into the industry because it is a tech-first industry.
That's great. That's exactly the kind of feedback that this workshop is ultimately
Great, thanks.
So thank you for sharing that.
I missed it. What was the age cohort, Eugene, that you were focusing on other than high school?
The age cohort was more, at this point, it's generally open. We're thinking that from a marketing point of view, it might make sense to focus initially on post-secondary students. So generally in that range, but again, like I said, if the general consensus is that we should be targeting high schoolers instead, let's do that.
Or both.
Or both.
I think, I mean, we're in the north, so I heard a couple of things today. So there's, like, the Microsoft talk was amazing, right?
Yes.
Like you hear that that's aspirational, but in the context of where some northern organizations are as far as their journey to open data, there's a big leap to get from where they're at to that, aspirational sort of open data free, because there's a bunch of like privacy concerns and capacity issues. And I mean, I don't know, like a northern organization could speak to this better than me, but the layers are complex, and I feel that the demographic of youth, which could be all the way up to 35, from, I don't know what, 15 or something, could be an interesting cohort to look at in the context of the North, because, and I wouldn't say high school or post-secondary, because education outcomes are different in the North than they are in the South.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I've heard northern organizations look at, instead of looking at it from look at people that are already skilled at data and invest in those people.
Right.
So whether they're high school, whether they're 30 and professionally working in this kind of role, so if you want to include the North, I think like that kind of scoping of youth
Right.
with a degree.
The answer from, we talked about this, it's most likely a hybrid approach. The thing is, you want to make it accessible across all of Canada, but there probably are opportunities to set up hubs where people can go in person to visit. So ideally, we get one of post-secondary institutions to say, hey, and really the clubs that exist within those post-secondary institutions, the ones I've been familiar with, it's easy for a club to get a space, right? Ideally, we can get department approval and everything else and get them to push it. But at minimum, getting a club to say, grab a room for a few hours just for some parts of this, I think that'd be great to at least get it started. So the short answer is, generally the idea is it's going to be online, but opportunities for people to physically go in person.
Edmonton had success with public library.
Yes.
When the public library hosts it, there's a better response.
In a school?
We haven't had a chance to go to schools. We work with some of the schools, but the hackathons typically are run through EPL.
And there's no question, but there's a comment also that we might want to speak louder because the microphone is right over there, so it's hard for online participants to hear. And the next question comes from Lee Doucet. One of my concerns about learning parts is that career transitioners, especially those that are older, would get bulldozed by people who are less patient. How do we create the best learning environment for everyone?
That's a really good question.
It's a philosophical education question.
Yes.
Any teachers?
Yeah, no, I don't have a great answer to that question. I think it's going to be challenging of sorts. The one thing that I think is going to be helpful is trying to set up, there's going to be an awards part to this, right? But the awards are going to make it clear that we're going to categorize these groups of capabilities differently so that there isn't the intent to like, you have to go and like go really fast or whatnot. It's not a great answer. The short answer is, I think we need to figure that out better. That's really the answer, right? Because I don't really know. I'm constantly surprised by what I don't know with respect to education. I'm currently a master's student at the U of A, and there's a prof there that that's focusing on education that has dispelled many of the myths that I used to believe. Like people have different ways of learning, visual, auditory. It's not to say that that's not true, but generally speaking, visual is what people tend to focus on. That's how they learn. There are people who have learning disabilities for whom that's not the case. And if you try and spread it out this is a quick example. If you do try to allow for other modes of learning, then it helps those people, even if you were mistaken initially about the premise, right? So stuff like this I didn't know about, and I'd ask her, is basically what I would say. I'm sure there's other people we should be asking. So if you have ideas on who those are, please let us know.
Probably set up some mentorship opportunities maybe too. The people who are experienced get partnered with the people who are not and help them learn how to have a voice.
Well, Frida's mentioned this many times,
Yeah.
and I've suggested to her, like, I don't know how we're going to manage so many mentors, but
that could be a prize, right? Best mentor
Oh,
or
yeah,
whatever.
no.
I don't know.
that's a great idea. That makes sense.
Sometimes, validation is nice.
Thinking about groups that might want to come to this and thinking of capacity at the same time. I've seen hackathons, and I see, especially in the north, we do a thing and things happen and that's great, and then we all go back to our lives.
Right.
And that's cool. I mean, that's the nature of life. I think one of the things I would love to see out of this is not just technical people, but like there are bastions of information across Canada and especially across the north that are difficult to get into, and they're not going to be solved in the duration of a hackathon.
Mhm.
I would love to see mentorships or relationships established by people who are interested in posing questions and partnering with people who have the information to answer them, so that we've created some capacity and some skills, whether that's youth, whether that's interested people in the community, with data holders who are like, I have a bunch of stuff, I just don't know how to get it out there, or I'm concerned about the privacy piece and I need to connect the person on how do I provide some assurances that I can share this information, or what are the boundaries around that. So I think that's a really important thing that I see is, it's not just the one and done, it's the creating the community and relationships at a local and global or country level, unlock some of that ongoing stuff.
That makes sense. And when I said I was cautious about the mentorship part, it was just more like, we got 1,000 students, how do we assign mentors? I worry about that aspect, but I don't think you're wrong here. And it's a question of logistics and how we manage to do so. One thing we have talked about before multiple times is the idea of having mentorships as well as internships as prizes, right? It's a very natural outcome for people who are interested in these sort of things. And I'm sure there are enough government groups that would be happy to work with a very excited bunch of students who have the technical capability.
Not just governments, but local organizations like the ones you've mentioned, as a prize, 1-year internship with this organization to learn on the ground with the community.
So just want to follow up on the point that was raised a moment ago. So maybe it's just a question clarification, but are you suggesting that we ensure that we invite enough folks who are the bastions, that they have try and ensure that we have people who can bring the content to the folks who are trying to work with the content and make sure that there's a kind of a thoughtful follow-on kind of next step. That's what.
Yeah, I think there are people who are like, I've got information and I want to put it in the hands of smart people who can solve or answer questions for me. And there's lots of those people. Many of them are represented, I think, in this conference. There's another group of people who are right on the edge who are like, I've got some information, but I'm kind of leery about putting it out there, either because it might be sensitive or I don't know how to even engage in the conversation. And then there's another group of people who are like, oh no, that's mine, you can't touch it. And I think these kinds of things, like creating a bit of an on-ramp, a bit of a path for the other side, not just the technical folks, to be like, hey, for those who are like, it's mine, you can't touch it, we can say, hey, there's this other world up here, and it might be okay. It might be more than okay, it might actually be really, really beneficial to you and the community. But I think, it's focusing on the doers, but also the people who are a bit of the key holders and showing a path for them.
I am going to quickly kind of mention a couple of things. One, Miranda mentioned that she thinks that part of the solution is creating an inclusive learning environment for doing that is creating different types of sessions, workshops, skill learning sessions, mentorship opportunities. I think it makes sense. That's good feedback, and definitely bring that forward. So, okay, and then this is great. I'd love to just stay here and just talk like this. This is awesome. But unfortunately, I think it's also important for us to try and capture different elements of what people think as well on some of these boards. So we're going to start that exercise here. I originally had it for, well, it's 10:40, and I think the next session actually happens in, 20 minutes. So I would, sorry? But there's also a break too, so I don't want to like overly, okay, if you guys are okay with that, I'm gonna take a break here. But let's go with, for now, let's go with 14 minutes. What you see around you is, so there is a mural board right there, but that's not really what I'm asking you to do. That's more for the people who are joining us virtually to be able to just populate them. We have the physical equivalents to those boards here. And we have a green bag of many Post-its and other things. And if you and pens, those 60 pens cost $5. I don't know, just a random fact. But yes, we have these things here, and there are a few themes. The 4 themes that we have around some of these questions are. Content for the actual Learn-a-thon aspect of things, a question around what your thoughts or experiences are around hackathons, about this actual learning, the event itself, and finally, people or organizations you think that we should connect with or they should be interested in these sort of things. So for the next, I guess, 13 minutes, if you don't mind, please go ahead to, call it 13 minutes. Please go ahead and just fill these out with these on the paper, and I'll be around to answer any questions. But we've got lots of these. Please feel free to be liberal with the ideas.
I can help.
Thank you. Sorry.
I'm really good at opening Post-it packages.
I obviously have a problem with doing that. I also answer.
I say that confidently as I don't know how to do it.
It's 2014, 2015.
Yeah.
And you're trying to figure out how to get control there.
Yes, so we want to redo it, yeah, but we want to target post-secondary students.
Okay.
At least, based on the feedback we've had. Alright, so we're looking at some specific questions we can answer, but we're helping to build this national Learn-a-thon.
Okay, thank you, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Eugene, what did you want to do with the forms?
Yes, the forms.
I have 2 laptops set up. Do you want me to set up the other 2? Choose one.
Sure, actually, if you want to set up the other 2, that'd be great. You're on the.
Because I need all this.
We could put one here. Oh, right. By the way, there's a few more here, so they're just going to be on the table because sticking them up. I want to personally thank Philippe and Wilfrida for this because apparently all of the different types of sticky tape wasn't working.
Oh, on the walls, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good. I didn't even notice it until you mentioned it, but now I'm just like, oh, that is a lot of duct tape.
No, because nothing else
That's
worked.
what we're thinking, but
Nice.
it's either.
When
we
all
give
else
them
fails, duct
data
tape.
set
Yeah,
or
exactly.
access to
Always
some
a good
sort of
choice.
data, and they are responsible for coming up with finding a problem, solving that problem. And there will be specific criteria.
I can wait, but is this is some replicating open data societies kind of ramping up?
Yeah, well, I guess I should have mentioned this aligns nicely with what the society's goals are, right?
Again, all of this
So,
is like
in
it's
short,
very
yes, we're
infancy.
interested in,
So if
or
you
at least
hear
I'm
something
interested, and a few board members I
or
think are interested.
idea,
Yeah.
that's the whole purpose.
But,
Sort of like an exploratory kind of stage. at the moment? Kind
I
of?
think it's a little bit more than, exploratory is probably accurate thing. I'd say a little bit more because we put down more concrete, like, here's some ideas of how we execute some of these things and whatnot. But I think working with different groups and communities to make this happen is the way this becomes successful, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Cool, that's awesome.
Yeah. Sean, if you have any ideas or suggestions,
Yeah.
I'm just saying like more
Create a competition that's
like
equal
after this,
for all.
And if there are some.
if this is something of interest to you, then we should chat a little bit more because I think one thing we want to do is we want to get perspectives from different parts of everywhere, in different capacities, capabilities, that sort of thing. And I think this is the sort of thing that I feel as an advocate of open data, it gets me somewhat excited.
Totally, yeah. Yeah.
I will say that often when I think of hackathons, I've been there enough, right? And
Totally.
there's a certain demographic and certain group of people and a certain amount of interest as well. So I think that's been, it used to be the hype thing many years ago.
Like 10 years ago. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I don't think that's the case anymore, and for good reasons, right? So why don't we try and address some of those reasons with this as well?
Yeah, and this feels like a cool kind of way of reframing it in a more like learning is really what people get out of hackathons.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's a nicer like sort of way of labeling it. That
Yeah, so we'll
then
see.
people come in sort of knowing what they might be able to get out of it in a more accurate way.
Yeah. I still do want to keep the hackathon aspect because I think that's what ultimately people use to, they get driven in by the idea of creating something within a short time frame and also possibly winning a number of prizes, right?
Yeah.
So I think that'd be good.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it's just brainstorming, that's really the work on one.
It's like still some.
Did you want these?
Oh, you want more post-it notes? Yeah, there are definitely.
I'll just steal a few.
You can split it out. I'm good, Eugene.
Oh, you're good? Yeah. It will free that.
I mean, it works. I'm trying to get access to the form, but it's gonna be some obscure link.
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, it's a link. It's online, and it's yes.
I have to get it on.
Oh, you have to get. Can I just send it to you via Slack? No. How do I get it to you?
I don't know yet.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a problem I can solve. That is legitimately a problem I can solve. So I'm going to do this. This here.
Two of them are up and running, so.
Okay. What I'm going to do also is going to send it to.
See if I can get on my Gmail.
That'd be great, but I also wonder. Sorry, Jeff, can you send this link to the virtual? This link that I'm sending to you via Zoom.
I can.
Okay, and then I'm gonna do a URL shortener for this one so that we can just type it in.